Carl Jung's most unsettling discovery did not begin with madness. It began with perception, not the kind of perception you and I use every day. The surface-level awareness that notices a polite smile, a raised eyebrow, a nervous laugh. No. What Jung stumbled upon was something altogether different. Something sharper, something so precise that it became dangerous. He met people who could not just see faces, they could see through them. They pierced the mask of normal life and uncovered what lay hidden beneath. The fear no one admitted, the bitterness no one confessed, the pain no one wanted to acknowledge. Jung would later call this strange ability differentiated perception. It wasn't fantasy. It wasn't a delusion. It was reality stripped of its protective layers. Imagine a world where nothing could be hidden, where every false smile screamed of despair, every confident gesture carried the weight of insecurity, every silence carried the roar of unspoken resentment. That was the world these patients lived in, and instead of giving them power, it destroyed them. One case haunted Jung more than any other. It was 1913, the year his break with Freud shattered his intellectual world and left him wrestling with his own descent into the unconscious. During this fragile time, a patient came to him unlike any he had ever seen. She was a profoundly introverted, intuitive type. To speak with her was to feel as though she had already understood everything before you even opened your mouth. Jung recorded that she could walk into a room and immediately sense the entire psychological atmosphere. She knew who was lying. She knew who was secretly afraid. She knew who carried silent resentment like a dagger hidden beneath their coat. It was not guesswork. Her insights were specific, uncanny. When Jung tested her, probing gently, asking questions, her answers lined up with reality again and again. She didn't imagine, she perceived. But here was the tragedy. Her gift ruined her life. She could not engage in ordinary small talk. Every casual word felt loaded with hidden meaning. Every trivial conversation seemed like a lie waiting to be unmasked. While others laughed, she heard the sorrow behind the laughter. While others gossiped lightly, she felt the envy, the jealousy, the suppressed hostility that churned beneath their voices. Friendships were impossible. People felt naked in her presence, as though standing before a mirror that reflected everything they didn't want to see. And most people do not forgive the mirror. They shun it. They smash it. Work was equally impossible. In every environment, she disturbed the fragile agreements, the collective illusions that keep groups from falling apart. Every office, every circle of friends, every family depends on certain things being left unsaid. She could not leave them unsaid. Her presence disrupted the unconscious pacts that hold groups together. So instead of being celebrated for her insight, she became exiled by it. Not because she was wrong, but because she was too right. Jung realized something deeply disturbing. He wasn't treating a psychotic. He wasn't dealing with someone broken or delusional. He was face to face with someone whose perception had outgrown the world. He wrote that she displayed an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others. But this ability caused her nothing but torment. It was not a gift. It was a curse, and Jung began to see a larger pattern. These individuals were not sick. They were not imagining. They were victims of a perception so differentiated, so refined, that ordinary life could not contain it. This realization shook Jung, because if the unconscious becomes too conscious, something breaks. The balance collapses. To live among others requires a degree of blindness, a tolerance for illusion, a willingness to ignore what is uncomfortable. But what happens when you cannot ignore? What happens when you see everything? You become an outsider. You become exhausted. You become alone. Jung noted how his patient described others with startling precision. She would speak of their hidden motives, their secret anxieties, their buried hostility, and every time he found her perceptions to be frighteningly accurate. He could not dismiss her as delusional. She was too consistent, too correct. This was not psychosis. This was not hallucination. It was a consciousness so heightened that it became unlivable. Imagine for a moment carrying that burden yourself. Imagine stepping into a crowded room and knowing, without being told, who is crumbling behind their fake smile. Imagine knowing which couple will not survive the year, sensing the bitterness already eating away at them. Imagine hearing not just the words people say, but the truths they are desperate to bury. To live this way is to live without rest, without escape, because where others can be comforted by illusion, you see only the raw and unbearable truth. Jung saw in her case the tragic paradox of superior perception. The more you see, the less you can belong. The clearer your vision, the darker your isolation. He wrote, "The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates." In other words, her curse was not what she saw. Her curse was that no one else saw it. And when you see what others cannot or will not see, you are left stranded in a world that denies your reality. Jung would later connect this to his larger theory of personality types, especially the introverted intuitive, the rarest of them all. These people, he observed, live in a constant state of heightened perception. They are not satisfied with appearances. They see through them, but because of this, they are forced to pay the price. Alienation, exhaustion, and the gnawing sense that they inhabit a different world entirely. This was not madness. It was too much clarity. For Jung, this single case became a window into a terrifying truth. The human mind is not destroyed only by illusion. It can also be destroyed by too much reality. The unconscious exists for a reason. It shields us. It softens reality. It allows life to be bearable. But for the over-perceptive, that shield is torn away. And once it is gone, there is no way back. This was Jung's chilling realization in 1913, that sometimes the mind collapses not because it cannot see, but because it sees too much. But here's the darker truth Jung discovered. When perception becomes too sharp, when the unconscious becomes too conscious, it doesn't come as a gift. It comes as a burden. Those who see what others don't always end up paying a price. And Jung observed 3 of these prices again and again. The first was social alienation. When someone can see behind the mask, the nervous twitch, the forced smile, the hidden resentment, others feel exposed. They feel as if their private self has been trespassed. Conversations become strained, friendships begin to die, and even family ties loosen, because no one likes to feel as though their inner secrets are being read without permission. For the one who perceives, small talk becomes impossible. Every word, every gesture carries a double meaning, and this awareness creates distance. The second price is emotional exhaustion. To constantly absorb what others are hiding is like carrying their shadows on your back. Jung noticed that these individuals often felt depleted, not from their own struggles, but from carrying fragments of everyone else's unconscious material. It's like being the emotional dumping ground for an entire room without anyone realizing it. Day after day, their nervous system is overloaded with other people's unspoken fears, jealousies, desires, until one day, they break. And the third price is perhaps the most dangerous: identity confusion. When you see too deeply into others, you risk losing yourself in them. Jung called this phenomenon participation mystique, a blurring of boundaries where the line between you and them begins to dissolve. Suddenly their moods feel like your moods. Their conflicts feel like your conflicts. Their guilt, their envy, their pain. It bleeds into your own psyche until you no longer know what belongs to you and what doesn't. This is why Jung warned, when the unconscious becomes too conscious, the personality is endangered. It's not madness, it's drowning in too much truth. And this wasn't just theory. Jung was describing what he saw in living, breathing people. People who weren't insane, but simply too perceptive for the society they lived in. Today, we'd call some of them highly sensitive persons, a concept popularized by psychologist Elaine Aron. The idea that some people are biologically wired to process more sensory and emotional information. But Jung's view was sharper, narrower, and in some ways more disturbing. He wasn't talking about sensitivity in general. He was talking about the introverted, intuitive type. A type so rare, perhaps just 1% of humanity, that most people never meet one in their lifetime. And yet, for Jung, this type held a mirror to the truth. When you see too much, you suffer, because society isn't built for people who pierce through appearances. It's built for people who can live comfortably in illusion. When Carl Jung studied those rare individuals who could see too clearly, he noticed something that went far beyond private suffering. It wasn't only their own alienation, their exhaustion, or their blurred sense of self that plagued them. It was also the way society turned against them. Because when someone can perceive the truth you're trying to hide, when someone can quietly pick up on the shadows you don't want to acknowledge, you don't always thank them for it. You resist them, you project onto them, and sometimes you even destroy them. Jung explained this with one of his most important concepts, the mechanism of shadow projection. Every human being carries within them what Jung called the shadow. All the impulses, flaws, contradictions, and unflattering truths that the conscious self doesn't want to admit. We bury them. We deny them. We say, "That's not me." But when someone comes along who sees it, who feels the undercurrent beneath your words, who notices the tremor in your voice when you lie, suddenly the shadow can no longer stay buried. And that moment is deeply uncomfortable, because now you're faced with a choice. You can either look inward, admit that the other person is right, and start the difficult work of integrating your shadow. Or you can attack the mirror. And for most people, the second choice is much easier. This is why Jung saw that the person who carries a heightened perception often becomes the scapegoat. They become the target. They didn't cause the hidden tension in the group. They didn't create the buried guilt in the family. They didn't invent the lies that someone else told. But by seeing it, by unintentionally exposing it, they draw the hostility of everyone who feels threatened. It's a strange paradox. The very gift that could make them healers, counselors, and truth-tellers often turns them into outcasts. Because people don't want to face themselves, they would rather blame the one who noticed. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. Imagine the employee in an office who quietly points out the flaws in the company's leadership. They're not being rude. They're not trying to start a rebellion. They're simply stating reality. But suddenly, they're accused of being negative. They're seen as the problem. Management says, "You're disrupting morale." Colleagues whisper that this person is difficult. And before long, the one who spoke the truth is pushed out. Not the leaders who created the dysfunction in the first place. Or consider friendships. The overperceptive person notices when someone is pretending to be happy but isn't. They sense the strain in the voice, the tension behind the smile. And if they bring it up even gently, they risk being told, "You're overanalyzing. You're making things weird." Well, they get blamed for noticing what everyone else wants to ignore. At the deepest level, Jung understood that people attack what they cannot face in themselves. And the more clearly someone sees, the more they provoke this unconscious defense. Society doesn't reward raw perception, it punishes it. Jung even noted that whole groups, even whole cultures, will unite against the person who represents the truth they don't want to see. This is how scapegoating works in religion, in politics, in families, in workplaces. The person who shines a light is turned into the source of darkness. They are accused of being the very thing they reveal. The truth teller becomes the liar. The healer becomes the accused. The perceiver becomes the outcast. This is why the danger of being too perceptive is not simply loneliness or exhaustion. It is persecution. The group feels safer if they can project their flaws onto one person rather than admit that everyone is implicated. And so, throughout history, those who saw too much have often been silenced, mocked, exiled, or worse. Think of the prophets of old, who were rejected by the very people they tried to guide. Think of whistleblowers today, punished not because they lied, but because they told the truth. Jung saw this as a timeless psychological law. If you make people see themselves too clearly, many will turn against you. This is why the gift of perception comes with a curse. To carry it is to risk standing alone against the collective. It is to risk being misunderstood, misrepresented, and sometimes even destroyed, because for most people the truth feels more threatening than the lie. If Jung was right, not everyone who sees beneath the surface pays the price in the same way. The unconscious doesn't break through in one single pattern. It bends and twists through temperament, through personality, through the way each of us is built. That's why Jung outlined different pathways of intuition. And when intuition grows too strong, when it crosses the threshold into something extreme, it doesn't just show itself in one form. It splits into 4 distinct modes of being. Each one carries its own gifts and its own dangers. The first is the feeling intuitive. This is the person who doesn't just understand your emotions, they absorb them. Sit across from them, and they'll begin to feel your fear, your insecurity, your hidden resentment, as if those emotions were their own. At first, this seems like empathy raised to the highest degree. They can comfort others, predict shifts in moods, navigate complex relationships with uncanny precision. But the danger is that their boundaries dissolve. They stop knowing where they end and others begin. Emotional contagion consumes them, leaving them raw, drained, and confused. They may spend their lives carrying the pain of everyone around them, without realizing they've abandoned their own inner life. For the feeling intuitive, the world becomes a storm of emotions that are never truly theirs, and yet they suffer as if they were. Then there is the thinking intuitive. This type sees patterns. Where most people see events, the thinking intuitive sees causes, trajectories, outcomes long before they happen. They can look at a relationship, a business, a culture, and instantly glimpse where it's headed. They don't need years of data. Their minds leap ahead, connecting dots no one else even notices. But the price here is alienation. To speak their truth often means to sound absurd, paranoid, or even arrogant. Others dismiss them until time proves them right. And by then, the distance has already formed. They live in the tension of being misunderstood, of watching reality unfold exactly as they predicted, but too late for anyone to care. For the thinking intuitive, foresight feels less like a gift and more like a slow punishment. The third path is the sensation intuitive. This one is harder to explain, but perhaps the most haunting. Instead of seeing patterns with the mind, they feel them in the body. They sense tension in the room as a knot in the stomach. They detect dishonesty as a weight in the chest. They can even experience approaching illness, not only their own, but sometimes that of others, as if their body were a tuning fork resonating with invisible vibrations. In Jung's language, this borders on the psychosomatic, but in practice it feels uncanny, almost supernatural. The danger here is hypochondria, anxiety, a constant flood of sensations they can't interpret. Their body becomes an oracle, but one that never stops speaking, leaving them exhausted and fearful. For the sensation intuitive, life is lived on edge, with every muscle twitch and heartbeat whispering some deeper, darker meaning. And finally, there is the pure intuitive. This is the rarest and perhaps the most tragic. Pure intuition doesn't funnel itself through feelings or thoughts, or bodily sensations. It simply is a constant bombardment of impressions, images, insights, glimpses of truths that flicker like lightning. The pure intuitive sees everything, but can't always anchor it in language or reason. They live fragmented, scattered, overwhelmed by the endless stream of unconscious material breaking into awareness. They may seem visionary, even prophetic, but inside they're torn apart by the sheer weight of it all. Without grounding, they risk disintegration, losing their sense of self in the flood of perception. This is the archetype of the mystic who sees too much and retreats from the world, unable to carry what their eyes have opened to. Each path reveals a paradox, the gift of extraordinary perception paired with the burden of extraordinary suffering. Jung never romanticized this kind of intuition. He saw it as a dangerous imbalance, something that could illuminate life, but also consume it. Because the truth is, when you see too much, you also feel too much, think too much, or carry too much, and the very thing that sets you apart becomes the very thing that can tear you apart. Carl Jung was not a man who exaggerated. When he spoke of dangers, he meant dangers that reached into the very foundation of the psyche. And when it came to the rare individuals who could see what others don't, he identified 3 specific threats, 3 cliffs on which their mind could break. The first danger is the disruption of collective illusions. Society is held together by shared stories, narratives that give people comfort, purpose, and belonging. These stories are rarely factual in any absolute sense. They're myths, ideas, and agreements we pretend are universal truths. They're the glue that binds the tribe. But when someone comes along with perception sharp enough to pierce those illusions, the tribe feels threatened. Jung knew that exposing the truth society depends on ignoring is like pulling out the keystone of an arch. It makes the whole structure tremble. Think about how we all rely on polite fictions to live together. We pretend certain things are just, even when they're not. We pretend leaders are wise, even when they're corrupt. We pretend the system works, even when it fails millions. If someone cuts through those illusions, suddenly everyone feels the fragility of what they've built their life upon. And here lies the first danger. If you expose what people need to believe, they will not thank you. They will despise you. You become the one who disturbed their sleep, the one who woke them from a dream they desperately wanted to stay in. That is why prophets are killed, why whistleblowers are ruined, why those who see clearly are often left abandoned. The second danger Jung warned about is the isolation of the superior function. Jung's psychology rests on the idea of functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting. Most people live balanced enough within them, relying on their strongest while compensating with the others. But the rare person who develops one function far beyond the rest finds themselves cut off from others. For the intuitive, their way of perceiving reality is so alien, so ahead of the curve, that no one can follow them into it. They might see an outcome years before it arrives, sense tensions in relationships long before they surface, or understand patterns invisible to everyone else. But because they cannot easily communicate it, they end up isolated, trapped with knowledge they can't share. This isolation is brutal. Imagine seeing a storm coming across the horizon while everyone else is basking in the sun. You shout, "We need shelter now." But instead of listening, they laugh at you. They dismiss you as paranoid, negative, or strange. And so you stand alone, carrying the burden of foresight. Jung believed that such isolation could become unbearable. It's not just loneliness. It's the weight of being unable to offload your vision onto others. You end up alienated, mistrusted, and left with the heavy suspicion that maybe you're the crazy one. The third danger is perhaps the most terrifying: the loss of identity. For Jung, the unconscious was not just personal, but collective. Beneath our individual minds is a vast ocean of shared archetypes, instincts, and forgotten truths. The danger for the highly perceptive is that they can slip too far into this ocean. When you're tuned into others so deeply, you begin to blur the boundary between yourself and them. Their emotions invade your psyche. Their unconscious contents seep into you. You may wake up one day and realize you no longer know what you believe, what you feel, what you even are. This is the danger of dissolution, being swallowed by the collective unconscious until the thread of individuality snaps. Jung saw this in mystics who lost their footing, in visionaries who disappeared into madness, in artists who drowned in the symbols they tried to channel. The three dangers: disruption of illusions, isolation of superior function, and loss of identity, are not just abstract psychological risks. They are the lived reality of anyone who carries extraordinary perception. And the scariest part? These dangers often come not one at a time, but all together. Because the moment you disrupt illusions, you're isolated. And when you're isolated, you're more vulnerable to losing yourself in the very unconscious forces you've been forced to navigate alone. That is why Jung insisted that for the intuitive, survival requires more than raw perception. It requires grounding, humility, and above all, a strong sense of self. Without those, the very gift that sets them apart becomes the knife that undoes them. But here's the paradox. Society needs such people. Without them, illusions calcify into prisons, the unconscious festers into violence, and humanity forgets its shadow until it erupts in destruction. Yet society also fears them, and the individual who carries this vision must face a question that has haunted seers and prophets for millennia. Do you stay silent to survive, or do you speak and risk everything? If Jung was a man who warned of the dangers, he was also a man obsessed with cures. He didn't just describe the poison of extreme intuition, he spent his life searching for the antidote, and he called it the process of individuation. At its heart, individuation is about becoming whole. Not perfect, not holy, not enlightened in the glittery New Age sense of the word, but whole. That means embracing what is yours, separating it from what belongs to others, and learning to carry the weight of both light and shadow. Jung believed this was the only way to keep from being destroyed by your own intuition. The first step is what he called discrimination. And this isn't about judgment in the moral sense. It's about learning to tell the difference. If you're highly intuitive, you're constantly swimming in impressions, moods, and images that may not even belong to you. You walk into a room and feel sadness, and you can't tell if it's yours or the residue of someone else's despair. Without discrimination, you drown in a flood of psychic material that isn't yours to carry. So the task becomes this: to pause, to reflect, and to ask, what here is me, and what here is not mine? Jung urged people with intense intuition to build a kind of psychic filter, to notice when they're absorbing the atmosphere of others, and to anchor themselves back into their own core. It sounds simple, but for those who live with porous boundaries, it's the difference between sanity and collapse. The second step is shadow work, Jung's most famous and most misunderstood idea. For the intuitive, shadow work is not optional. Why? Because when you sense so much of others' unconscious material, you also awaken your own. Every fear you feel in another, every dark impulse you perceive in the crowd, calls up a mirror inside yourself. And if you haven't faced your own shadow, all of that projected darkness will pierce you like arrows. Shadow work means owning your own capacity for rage, envy, manipulation, despair, before the world shoves it in your face. It means saying, yes, that lives in me too. I see it. I won't let it rule me, but I won't pretend it's not there. This is what gives the intuitive strength, the ability to encounter another person's shadow without collapsing into it, because you've already made peace with your own. The third step is what Jung called conscious participation. Here's where it gets strange. Jung believed that the collective unconscious is not something you can just shut out. You're a part of it whether you like it or not. Every myth, every archetype, every ancestral memory, it lives inside you. So the goal is not withdrawal, but conscious engagement. Conscious participation means entering into the great psychic field of humanity without being consumed by it. It's like standing in a storm without being carried away. Jung advised building rituals, containers, and practices that allow you to enter the unconscious safely. He turned to solitude, not as an escape, but as a laboratory. Hours of journaling, drawing mandalas, studying dreams. These weren't hobbies. They were psychological tools, ways to hold the flood of images without drowning. He also leaned into what he called spiritual practices, not in the dogmatic sense, but in the sense of having something larger to anchor yourself to. Prayer, meditation, symbolic rituals, things that create meaning, and meaning creates order. Without meaning, intuition spirals into chaos. With meaning, it becomes guidance. For some, these containers are as simple as a daily journal, a trusted therapist, or a spiritual tradition that grounds them. For others, it's art, music, or movement. The body becoming the vessel for the unconscious to express itself without destroying the mind. Jung was insistent. Whatever form it takes, you must have a structure that can withstand the intensity of what you see. Because individuation is not just about self-protection, it's about transformation. Jung believed the intuitive person is not cursed to isolation forever. If they can hold their ground, if they can walk through shadow and maintain their center, they emerge not broken, but whole. And their gift, their terrifying alien gift of seeing what others don't, can finally be given to the world in a way that heals instead of harms. Individuation is not a path to comfort. It is brutal. It demands solitude. It demands facing parts of yourself you'd rather never meet. It demands giving up the illusion of blending into the crowd. But on the other side, it offers something the collective never will: the ability to stand as a true individual, not swallowed by society, not swallowed by the unconscious, but rooted in the rarest thing of all, authentic being. History is full of people who carried this burden of extreme intuition, souls who could see more, feel more, and perceive deeper patterns than the world around them could handle. Some survived it, turning their vision into wisdom. Others were crushed by it, burned alive by the very fire that gave them their gift. One of the most tragic examples is Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche was not just a philosopher, he was an intuitive visionary in the purest sense. He could see truths that society was not ready to face. He tore apart illusions with surgical precision: religion, morality, culture. He dismantled them piece by piece, exposing the raw and terrifying undercurrents beneath. But Nietzsche's gift was double-edged. He was a thinking intuitive, able to perceive outcomes far beyond his own time. He foresaw the collapse of European morality, the rise of nihilism, the vacuum that would be left when God was declared dead. He warned of the dangers of herd mentality, of a society that suppresses individuality for comfort. Yet, though he could see it all, he could not bear the weight of his own perception. He lacked the grounding of integration. He spent his life in near total solitude, alienated from the very society he diagnosed. His health collapsed, his mind fractured. By the end, Nietzsche broke under the strain of what Jung later called the superior function left isolated, an awareness too far ahead of others, with no one to share it with. Nietzsche's fate is the shadow side of intuition. The fire that lights the world can just as easily consume the one who carries it. But then there are other figures who carried the same gift and found ways to channel it into wisdom rather than destruction. One such man was Meister Eckhart, a Christian mystic from the Middle Ages. Eckhart, like Nietzsche, was an extreme intuitive, but instead of collapsing into fragmentation, he managed to anchor his perceptions in the language of the spiritual. He saw through the surface of religious dogma to the living core of divine experience. He spoke of detachment, of entering the ground of the soul, of becoming one with the divine flow that underlies existence. Eckhart took the overwhelming flood of unconscious perception and translated it into a message of transformation for others. Instead of drowning in the collective unconscious, he learned to navigate it, almost like a lucid dreamer who realizes he is dreaming and then guides others through the same dream. This is what made Eckhart dangerous to the religious authorities of his time. His words carried the shock of truth. His intuitions cut through centuries of theology and landed directly in the human heart. That's why he was tried for heresy. But even under threat, he didn't collapse. He had a container, his faith, his spiritual practice, that allowed him to bear the unbearable. And then, of course, we have Carl Jung himself. It's easy to forget that Jung wasn't just a scholar writing from the safety of a library. He was a man who nearly lost himself in the abyss of his own unconscious. During the period when he wrote what later became the Red Book, Jung began having visions and experiences so intense that he thought he was descending into psychosis. Night after night, he encountered archetypes, gods, demons, and vast landscapes of the psyche. He saw rivers of blood, shadow figures, prophetic images of Europe's future wars. He didn't just study the unconscious. He walked into it, unarmed, and let it consume him. This was the danger of pure intuition, to see everything, to feel everything, without filters. Jung came close to the same fate as Nietzsche, but unlike Nietzsche, he managed to hold on. How? Because he turned the experience into a dialogue rather than a collapse. He treated his visions not as delusions but as messages. He painted them, wrote them, wrestled with them. He created a container, his journals, his mandalas, his method of active imagination, that allowed him to face the unconscious without being destroyed by it. It nearly broke him, yes, but in surviving it, Jung didn't just save himself. He gave the world a roadmap for surviving extreme intuition. He turned his personal confrontation into a collective tool, individuation. So here we see the full spectrum. Nietzsche, brilliant but shattered. Eckhart, mystical and integrated. Jung, nearly broken but transformed. Three examples of what happens when a person collides with the infinite depths of intuition. The difference between collapse and transcendence comes down to one thing: integration. Without it, the gift burns you alive. With it, the same fire becomes illumination for yourself and for others. And maybe this is the real lesson history whispers to us, that intuition, no matter how powerful, is never enough on its own. It must be grounded. It must be carried with humility, discipline, and practice. Otherwise, it is just a raw flood of perception that tears the psyche apart. So where does all of this leave us? If Jung was right, then seeing what others don't isn't a gift you flaunt. It's a responsibility you carry with care. Because perception is powerful, but power without grounding can destroy both the one who holds it and the people around them. Jung's advice was deceptively simple. Seek the few who understand. This is not about building a crowd. It's not about persuading the masses. It's about finding the rare individuals who are also walking the road of individuation. People who have wrestled with their own shadows, who know what it means to hold difficult truths, and who won't be terrified or threatened by your vision. Think about it. In a world where most people cling to comforting illusions, those who can face reality without flinching are like beacons in the night. You don't need 100 of them. You may only find 2 or even 1 across an entire lifetime. But that one presence can mean the difference between collapse and endurance. Jung often emphasized the importance of safe relationships, not in the shallow sense of people who always agree with you, but in the deeper sense of people who can contain what you carry without shattering. These are fellow seekers on the path, those who have tasted solitude and come back with wisdom. They are the natural containers of psychic material, souls spacious enough to hold complexity without judgment, and grounded enough to listen without drowning. Without these rare relationships, you risk falling into what Jung called psychic inflation, believing you're a prophet, a chosen one, someone above the rest. That path ends in madness, but with the right companions, your perception can be refined, tested, and grounded in something larger than your own ego. And here's something Jung insisted on that most people overlook: the principle of gradual revelation. If you see what others don't, you can't just unload it all at once. People resist too much truth when it comes suddenly. It destabilizes them. It threatens the fragile framework they've built to survive. So instead of trying to force them awake, you reveal slowly. A piece here, a question there. You test the waters. You gauge their response. If they recoil, you stop. If they lean in, you share more. Truth, Jung believed, is not a hammer to crush illusions. It's a slow, careful fire that has to be tended, or else it burns everything down. This doesn't mean you hide forever. It doesn't mean you play small. It means you respect the timing of growth. You understand that not everyone is ready to see, and you protect yourself from the despair that comes when you try to wake the unready. Because here's the reality. The danger of seeing what others don't isn't only about isolation. It's also about the temptation to force your vision on people who are not prepared for it. That path will make you bitter. It will convince you that humanity is hopeless, when in truth, it is simply slow. Transformation is never instant. The path forward, then, is patience. It is seeking the few who can walk beside you. It is choosing solitude over shallow belonging. It is practicing the discipline of silence when speaking would destroy. And above all, it is committing to the lifelong work of individuation, of separating what is truly yours from what belongs to the collective, of carrying your own shadow so you don't project it onto others, and of engaging with the collective unconscious without letting it consume you. When you live this way, perception doesn't have to break you. It can strengthen you. It can make you into something more than just a lonely outsider. It can make you into a vessel, a place where truth is held, not wasted, not forced, but protected until the time is right. And maybe that's what Jung was really pointing to. Not a life of despair, not a life of superiority, but a life of deep responsibility. To see what others don't is not to be better than them. It is to carry something fragile, something powerful, something dangerous, and to carry it wisely. That is the path forward. And so, we arrive at the heart of the paradox. To see what others cannot see, to perceive the hidden currents beneath the surface of life, is both a curse and a gift. It can destroy you, or it can evolve you. Jung never sugarcoated this. He knew from his own battles that heightened perception carries with it a risk of collapse, of being overwhelmed by visions too heavy for one person to carry. And yet, if integrated, if matured, if held within the structure of a strong psyche, this very same gift becomes the seed of transformation. The intuitive introvert walks a dangerous road. To peer into the collective unconscious is to stare into the abyss. But unlike Nietzsche, who fell into that abyss, Jung believed it was possible to build a bridge across it. And those who manage to cross become what he called culture carriers. They are the ones who advance human consciousness, not by escaping the darkness, but by passing through it and returning with wisdom intact. This is the essence of individuation, not to be swallowed by your gift, not to deny it, not to bury it, but to harness it, to integrate it, to weave it into the fabric of your actual life. When that happens, what once felt like a curse begins to reveal itself as the most extraordinary opportunity of all. Jung captured it in a single haunting line. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Think about that. not who society told you to be, not the watered-down self that blends in to avoid judgment, but the full truth of your being, the one that sees, that knows, that carries a depth of vision others cannot imagine. Of course, the danger doesn't disappear. To see too much is still to live with a kind of loneliness. To walk this path is to accept that many will not understand you, and some will even fear you. But it is also to accept that within this difficulty lies your greatest strength. For if you can withstand the isolation, if you can shape your perception into wisdom, then you stop being a victim of your gift. You become its master. That is the transformation Jung offers. From cursed visionary to conscious carrier of culture, from isolated seer to someone who lifts the collective one step forward. And maybe that's the question you must ask yourself now. Will you let your perception devour you? Or will you use it to become extraordinary? Because in the end, Jung reminds us, the path is treacherous, but the reward is rare. To live fully and without compromise as the person you truly are. And if you've walked with me through this journey, if these words resonated with something deep inside you, then I want to invite you. Pause for a moment. Reflect. And if this message stirred something in you, don't just disappear back into the noise. Leave a comment. Tell me how it spoke to you. Like this video, share it with someone else who might need to hear it. And most of all, subscribe and tap the notification bell. Not just because it helps this channel, but because it keeps you connected to these ideas, to this ongoing exploration of the hidden truths Jung and others left behind. Because the path of individuation is not walked in one day or one video. It is a lifelong unfolding, and sometimes a single reminder can be the difference between being consumed by the vision and being strengthened by it. So let's carry this together. Let's not bury the gift, but grow into it. The danger of seeing too much is real, but so is the possibility of becoming extraordinary through it. And maybe, just maybe, that's why you're here.